Hey, so this is the Drunkalogs, a podcast about addiction and recovery in which each guest shares their version of how it was, what happened, and how it is now, and then endures a half-hour Q&A at the hands of your host, Nick Morton.
My next guest grew up in Sweden, where drinking beer was kind of a way of life. His drinking escalated when he moved to Australia for college, and then got out of control when he started working in advertising and PR in Southeast Asia, where the expat community thrived in a lively and inexpensive bar scene. His life was turned upside down after a couple of job losses, and he soon found himself drinking just to make it through the day. Eventually, he was hospitalized and managed through pharmaceutical intervention and the 12 steps to get sober. When a friend and colleague lost his life to suicide, a message he posted online went viral, and he now divides his time between his work running an executive peer support group and his work as a writer and public speaker. He has a new book out called Executive Loneliness. Won't you please welcome Nick Jonsson?
We grew up then in a town called Nybro in outside of Kalmar with 20,000 people. And when I was 14, we moved into Kalmar. And I remember, this town with 75,000 people at the time looking so big. It was a big move from 20,000 to 75,000 people.
Right. And when did you have your first drink?
It was when I moved into the bigger town. It was more pressure than suddenly from the other kids and so on, and I was more exposed to it. So I was about 14 and a half, and it was beer with other students from school.
Right. And was like drinking a big part of the Swedish culture?
It was, and even these days when I'm looking back at it, it was really something that you looked at like, well, you turn 18, you get a driving license, you can drive a car. You're 15, you can drive a motorbike. When you're 20, you can buy hard liquor at the store. When you're 18, you're allowed to buy beer. So it was sort of things that you looked up to, and you associated it with really, adulthood, and it was things that you naturally saw the adults doing, everyone was doing, it was socially acceptable. You heard that smoking at the time when I grew up was starting already, to be questioned, but drinking wasn't really questioned.
And were your parents drinkers and smokers?
They were smokers, and I remember clearly when they stopped when I was sort of 11, 12 years old, and I was quite happy about that. They used to smoke at home. And drinking, they were drinking just like normal Swedish people, on the weekend and at holidays and so on. Not too excessively, but they were drinking just like everyone else, basically.
And so what was the sort of shape of your trajectory into, addictive, self-destructive behavior?
Yeah, so I remember, feeling quite small, being shy and so on, especially having moved in then to a new town, and changing school at the age of 14 is quite difficult. So
Right.
I came from being one of the better students in the smaller town in the school to suddenly being one of the worst. And I naturally was looking for my sort of tribe, to people to hang out with, and it naturally became the students who were the least performing ones. And instead we were having fun and drinking, getting into motorbikes and beers. So with that, I started to drink to relax and also to be cool. I remember from the beginning it was to be cool, and then it was quite expensive. We drank beer, but it was expensive for a student. And you used to start to make the home brew, sort of liquor, moonshine and that kind of stuff, and that some of the students were doing that, and you bought it cheaply, and of course it was very strong and it made you very sick. And so that started to become an issue.
Did you make your own booze, or was it just your friends?
My friends did it. Yeah, I remember getting some of the wine making equipment. It tasted so bad you couldn't even drink a sip of it.
Right. And where would you guys party? Would you go to each other's houses, or would you sneak into bars, or?
So basically it was, if some parents, some of the children's parents were traveling away for the weekend, then naturally you would try to host a party
Right.
and it always ended up in disaster, right? The house half destroyed and
Right.
motorbikes destroying the grass outside and
Oh
so on.
God.
So in the end, we were sitting, making bushfires in the forest and drinking like that, or hanging around town and so on, and drinking as we were underage. We were not really welcome anywhere
Right.
else.
And then did you go off to university?
Yeah, so after high school, I started to work as a construction painter. I just like my dad was a builder, it was naturally becoming construction for me. But since he was a builder, he thought it was good if I paint. He built a house, someone need to paint it. So
Sure.
naturally, that's what I started to do, and I was quite happy with that. I earned a decent income. I bought a motorcycle. I used to travel around by motorbike and see myself around, and I was quite happy with my life. But age 22, I had an accident with a motorbike, and I injured my spine and so on. And the doctor said that I cannot continue to be a construction worker anymore. So I had to go back to high school, age 22, to increase my grades so that I finally could enter university. So 1998, age 23, I moved to Australia to learn English.
Wow. Where in Australia did you go?
I moved to the Gold Coast, and it was actually supposed to be 3 months just learning English, and then I could enter universities because my grades were not good enough in English. So I needed to study it intensely. But I didn't leave necessarily. I stayed in Australia. I did two bachelor's degree and a master, so I stayed 6 years there.
And what university were you going to?
I went to Bond University on the Gold Coast, a private university with a very nice university pub. I still remember the name today. The name is Don's, and you will find my name there engraved on some of the golden plates behind the bar.
So I guess you spent a lot of time there, huh?
Yeah, so I mean, as growing up in Sweden, it had been socially acceptable. I was drinking on the weekends mainly by then, but coming down to Australia, from cold, dark Sweden, you're in Australia on the Gold Coast. It felt like I was on a holiday, and it was always something happening. And after studies, it was naturally go to a student bar, and it was quite cheap. It was subsidized. So it just started to increase the drinking. But I didn't think of it as anything abnormal. Just all the other students were doing it. But at that time also, and looking back at it, I realized that it also became a norm to bring 2 beers with you for the sauna. It also became the norm to start having a few beers when I was working on the assignments. And then as you played golf, you bring a couple of beers to bring with you in the golf bag. So looking back at it, it was always, everything I did involved drinking, really.
Yeah, yeah. It's crazy. I mean, and were there any consequences for that for you? Like, did you get in trouble? Did your grades suffer? I mean, I just like I remember for myself, I mean I was such a heavy drinker, and it was always mostly fun. Like it was usually fun, but then like the next day I would have responsibilities, and whatever, I'd be at lunch with my parents, and have to like sneak off to barf in the toilet. And it's like so miserable. It's so, at some fancy restaurant trying to, choke down a smoked salmon, but I'm just like too hungover. Like and I hated myself for it.
Yeah, so at that time, not yet for me. So I'm here 24, 25 years of age, and while I started to become a daily drinker, I only drank beer. And
Right.
I didn't like the taste of wine, I didn't drink hard liquor. So it was only beer, and I was always looking for the lowest grade alcohol because I enjoy the taste and I enjoy to drink a lot and slowly.
Right.
So I was always sort of half dosing myself with beer,
Right.
medicating myself
Interesting. Right.
to numb myself. Of course, I was extremely intoxicated many times in the student bar and drinking too much. But most of the time, it was just slow drinking the whole
Right.
time.
And did you do okay in school?
I did actually. I did very well, Nick, because I remember the dean of the school the first day gave a talk, and he said, when we look at sport, the number 2 is the first loser, he said, and he showed pictures of sports teams, winning gold, and then the other team crying when they walk off. And he said, we want you to have the same mentality here. And he said, we want you to win, we want you to get the scholarships, we want you to top the classes. And he fueled me up. For the first time, I started to get a taste for success, and I probably studied and worked harder than anyone else. So I topped a lot of classes. I kept my scholarship all the way through, and but I didn't write one of the assignments sober all the way through my degrees.
Right.
That was my way to cope with anxiety and being.
Sure.
I called myself being an anxious overachiever. That was probably what I was.
And you were studying what again? You were studying English literature?
No, that was just to get into the school. But first, I studied a Bachelor of Communication and then a Master of Public Relations.
Nice. And so what did you do when you graduated?
Yeah, so, I mean, Australia is as far away from Sweden as you possibly can get on the map, and I felt it was quite far. So I looked on the map, and halfway was sort of Thailand, Hong Kong, and Singapore. And as I graduated with pretty good grades, I sent my CV to advertising agencies in those 3 countries, and I got great response from Bangkok especially. So I said, then I will come over, and I had some job interviews there, and I got hired first by DDB, an American advertising company, as an account executive working in Bangkok. In 2004 was my first job after school.
How great. And how was that?
Oh, it was fantastic. Yeah, I was just not perhaps ready quite yet. So I stayed there for about 8-9 months. I was a bit impatient. I wanted to have more entrepreneurial job. Perhaps the agency was too big. So I got picked up by a small agency, more room for my growth and more room for networking, which involved drinking. So my role was really in business development, and the owner of this agency was a bit tired of entertaining all the clients coming by, and when they came to Bangkok, all the international clients, they wanted to be entertained. So he hired me to do that job, and I picked up new clients and maintained the clients, got more business out of them. And it seemed like, the more I was drinking, the better I performed. So
and I imagine the party scene in Bangkok is just next level lawlessness.
yeah, I remember it was really, really heavy nights. And this is the first time when real circumstances started to happen. I remember Formula One was on Sunday evenings shown in Thailand. And after big weekend drinking, then watching the Formula One on Sunday night, drinking still heavily, and I think it's finished like 9 p.m. Then getting up Monday morning, I always went to office, no matter how hangover, but I might have gone out for a few drinks after a few hours, sneaking out to get a couple of drinks. But this day I remember trying to make it to the office, and I couldn't. I was just getting too much panic attacks. I've been boozing way too heavily. I went to the doctor, and they inpatient me right away, basically.
Wow. For what? What was their diagnosis?
They said I had high blood pressure and all kind of things, and they didn't even question me or ask me if I had any problems with alcohol, and I didn't say anything. I didn't want to get exposed, I guess. So I get medication for blood pressure and all these kind of things.
Wow. And then what happens?
Yeah, and after that, I moved on with my career and moved to London with my ex-wife and worked there for a while. And then I was missing Asia, so a year later moved back to Vietnam. And when I came back to Asia, then I got a real taste for it. And in Vietnam, then jumping from job to job for a while. Then
and are you still working advertising at this point?
Advertising and PR, yeah, and alcohol was so cheap in Vietnam. I mean, beer was still my choice of drink, and it was just so cheap. You could.
How much?
Well, most of the bars you spent $5 for all you can drink for 4 or 5 hours of free flow and strong beer.
Oh my God,
so this
is
is
crazy. And what town are you in Vietnam?
Saigon. Yeah.
Wow. So and what's Saigon like? Is it what year is this now we're in?
So we're talking 2006, 2007, 2008.
Right.
And again, my drinking is taking off more, and I'm finding all reasons to go out to the bars. I started to watch Premier League football, and one of the bars, they watch all the home game and away games, so that's 2 nights a week. Then I joined the dart team of the club of the place. There's one competition a week plus one practice, so that's already 4 nights plus all the rest. So there was always an excuse or reason to go to the bar every day. And the bar scene was, for someone who liked drinking and boozing, was absolute fantastic. You had long streets of fun bars, a lot of entertainment. Every bar would be filled of 30, 40 promotion girls working there. And so the people talking to you, they get to know your name. You feel like this is where you belong, and then it didn't cost any money. So
Right.
it was a dangerous place for someone like me.
Right. And is your wife still with you at this point?
She is, yeah, and she works for one of the big fours as an accountant and auditor, one of the big American firms, and did really well for herself. And we were not so close. We started to drift away. She worked very long hours, and I tried to get her.
Is she American, or is she what is she? Is she from Bangkok, or?
No, she's from Sweden as well.
Oh, interesting. Cool. And so, all right. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. And then, so what? How do you? What happens from there?
Yeah. So then suddenly I thought my career was doing well, but suddenly I'm let go from my company, and I didn't really get the answers at the time, and it was a big shock. It was a big blow to my ego. I didn't know how to explain to anyone that I lost my job. I made it sound to the world, and probably fooling myself that I'm set up for something better and bigger, and I jumped from job to job for a while, and it was a big blow to my ego at this time, and my drinking took off. And then after
when you got let go from your job, was there any indication that your performance was being hampered by your drinking?
I kept asking the gentleman who terminated me for the reason, and he laid out 15, 20 things, and then I kept saying, is there anything else? The last thing he said after a long silence, he said, maybe you had too many big late nights.
It's amazing that it isn't. I mean, it's amazing the hesitancy people have. I don't know if it's still this way. I feel like I'm so isolated from the world in some ways, but to just call people out on their drinking. I guess it's it's like a personal choice, even though it's so can be so destructive. And it's like, I don't know. I remember I was on a movie once, and the director was clearly just drinking too much, and I was not sober at that point, but I really felt like someone just needed to sit him down and say, hey bud, you got to take some nights off and stay in. But of course, when you're dealing with an alcoholic, it's easier said than done.
Yeah, and there was no one who told me really, and I had to push hard for that one. And of course, I at the time I denied it, but it must have made a dent, because I remember it still today, and I was very resentful against him for that.
Right. Yeah. And so what happens? How do you sort of get towards your bottom?
Yeah, so then I moved into another company and in the fashion industry, a job in multi-level marketing, a lot of fun selling handbags and perfume and so on, with 15,000 salespeople all over Vietnam, fashion shows every day, and traveling around in a stretched limousine with models, and parties and so on. And I probably thought I was, the director of fashion TV or something like that. So I became a delusional, and the business was doing really, really well as well. So I remember I thought sort of that moment where I have arrived, screw all those people who didn't believe in me and terminated me. I have arrived, and the business was booming. But then suddenly it took a big turn. It was the time where the Lazadas and the online business started come and compete with us, and we suddenly lost the grip. And I remember being scared. Oh my God, here we go again. Will I be let go? So I reached out to the owner and I expressed, can I help you with something else and so on. And he actually promoted me and moved me to Jakarta to help him to work on the sort of the corporate culture of the business. And I remember traveling to Las Vegas, meeting Tony Che, who sadly is gone these days. Looking at Zappos, how they created a culture. So I studied
Right.
that and then
Right.
did something like this. And I was really motivated. And then I did a great job for a year then in Jakarta. And suddenly I was called into the office and the company had been sold. So I was let go again. And that is
Right.
the moment when the world collapsed around me, or the starting of the collapse.
Right. And so what did you do?
Well, I remember wearing...
What year is this now? We're at like 2010?
2015.
Right.
And I remember wearing a company t-shirt at the day, and I called my ex-wife and I said, I meet you at the local bar. I need to talk to you. And I said, bring a t-shirt. And then she sat in the bar and waiting for me with our son, who was 5 years of age at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, give me the t-shirt. And then I went into the toilet and I took off my company t-shirt and I threw it and in the rubbish bin, put on the other shirt. And then I remember going out drinking, having dinner with them. And I told her right away that I'd been terminated. And I was not ready. At this time also, I was not ready because I've been in the company 5 years. And my only way to cope with that was to drink. And so while they were there for a while, then they went home and I went on drinking. And that drinking after that episode didn't stop. And I eventually then, after a few months, asked my then wife to move back to Sweden with our son as I started trying to find a new job and so on. And I got a new job, but I had not got over then the big shock of having been terminated. So while I was in the new job, I am performing okay. I had so much anxiety and I had so much self-doubt that I never gave it a chance. I was just completely shell-shocked and I was thinking, well, I've been let go twice. The last job I did so well. So why even bother trying?
And you're back in Sweden at this point?
No, this is still in Jakarta here in this new job. My ex-wife and son was back in Sweden, so I'm by myself. I'm by myself in Indonesia. Lost my confidence by myself then, and my only friend was really going to the bar after work, meeting my friends and drinking. And having been a fit guy, having done marathons and triathlons until then, I really traded my gym membership and exercise routine to a bar stool and my healthy diet to fast food and pizza. And I didn't realize it, but 2015 to 18, it was a really slippery slope. And in 2018, I remember trying to play golf and I couldn't even walk 9 holes. So that's how unfit I was.
And is your ex-wife and son in Sweden this whole time?
Yes, they are there, and I don't really remember much of this period. It's all just blur, and I didn't take responsibility. I did not financially support. I didn't really care that they ended up living with my ex-wife's parents. And I had no sense of responsibility at all for anything.
Right. And so what happens?
Yeah, so then what happened is 2018, I'm still then struggling, and jumping from job to job, and I was completely lost at this stage. I moved back to Vietnam. I thought maybe that's in Vietnam where I should be, and I jumped to another job there as a recruiter, trying to do a job, but I started to then needing a drink at lunchtime. So this is when it started to really take off, and that was making me then becoming a daily drinker at the time. When I drank much in the evening, I needed Valium the next day, and so in 2018 I was really weak, and then a day drinker, morning drinker, and drinking around the clock, basically no sober days. At that moment, by a miracle, I got an offer to move to Singapore, a more modern country. to take up a job, and I said yes. And somehow I had a calling inside me, knowing and thinking that, there might be help there, because I remember trying to look for help, psychologist or someone who could speak English in Jakarta or Ho Chi Minh City. I just couldn't find the help. When I was at the shaky ground, I couldn't find some help. But at this moment, I thought Singapore will have it. So I made a promise to myself, and I had met a new woman then who came with me to Singapore, that I would eventually sort myself out. I drank for about 4 months until I hit my rock bottom then.
And then what? And were you able to keep your job?
Yes, I was able to keep my my job, and performing quite okay. So it was mainly selling memberships online, and I needed 3-4 beers before I could start my calls, and then I was quite stable. I was able to do the job during that time, but then I tried to. At that time, I tried to get well. I remember being so scared. I wrote my will, my testament, signed up for life insurance, because I was just so shaky. I didn't know how I would be able to detox and get well. I tried by myself and it didn't work. So the new girl who I met, who today is my wife, I remember one day, and it was my birthday, 2018, the 1st of May. I remember it. I really promised her and me I would stop today. I just couldn't. After about lunchtime, I asked her, please run to the shop and get me a 6-pack of Heineken. I can't cope. She did that. And then I said, we need to try a different approach tomorrow. Let's go to the hospital. And that's what we did. And they gave me an injection. They gave me some medication. And since that moment, I haven't had a drink.
And so when you go to the hospital, are you like, I'm an alcoholic and I'm killing myself and I can't stop drinking and I want to stop?
Well, I was pretty sick at the moment, and I was quite quiet. But the girl who I'm married with now was with me, and she did the talking. She told exactly the truth to the doctor.
And when you say that you were pretty sick, like what did your symptoms look like?
Very, very shaky, and I had a bad, like a bronchitis sort of cough. I remember, and I was. When even if I tried to exercise, I would start coughing blood. And that's how sick I was.
That's pretty sick.
Yeah, and I got vocal.
And so, what's in the injection they give you?
I think it was like a B vitamin injection, something like that. They wanted to inpatient me. For once, I didn't have the money. Secondly, I was dead scared, and so by a miracle, my now wife managed to get them to agree to give her the medication, but I need to come in for a few days, come back the next day to get more medication, and she had to be like a nurse supervising me as I was outpatient through this, and by miracle it worked so far. Not to drink in it's over 60.
I mean, it's they're just giving you vitamin injections, and that kind of what happens to like your cravings for booze and like.
They gave me a whole bag of medication for that. So this is, we went to the hospital in Thailand for this. We flew from Singapore to Thailand, and they gave, the lorazepam and all kind of medication, strong stuff that I later on had to taper off.
Right. And these are basically like to sort of provide the effect of alcohol without the damage, kind of. The idea is to kind of sort of wean you off your addiction to alcohol. Like
that's
the
right.
Way, what do they use for methadone works for heroin?
Yeah, I don't know that, but it was the strongest that you can get for all, and strong sleeping pills and so on.
And how long were you on the medication?
Yeah, so they gave her for about a month, and I remember clearly we're in Singapore, and she bought one of the cutters, and she acted like a nurse. She would cut it, she would put it here, and I would take it, and step by step I started to come back to life with this medication. But I remember, and I went to my first AA meeting sober also when I came back to Singapore there, and about a month later though I didn't realize, and I didn't know that the medication would suddenly finish, and she didn't know that she need to prepare for it. So one day I got some of the medication, but it was some I didn't get, and I started to become very, very shaky, and that was a very, very scary moment. I remember it clearly, and I said I cannot cope with this, and we went to a hospital in Singapore, and they just looked at me and wanted a $14,000 deposit to an inpatient me 2 weeks, and that made me panic even more. We called my dad, and he agreed to pay if needed, but my lady by my side grabbed my hand and walked away with me, and she remembered that I had some Valium from before, and I took that. And then we went to another doctor who subscribed the kind of medication that I had from Thailand, like the lorazepam and these kind of medications. And he gave us like a 2 months dosage and explained to us, okay, you take this now, but then you need to taper off it. And that's what I did. So during those next 2 months, I started to walk and exercise more and step by step taper off it. But I had a low dose of that for about a year. I was on some of the medications. I maintained a low dose for about a year. And I can remember the last time I took one of them was about 2 years in. I used to have some for backup if I had panic attacks and so on. So it was took me up to 2 years to get completely clean and sober from this.
And at what point in that process did you start going to meetings?
Yeah, so when I was still drinking, I went to one meeting. It was a morning meeting, 7 a.m. I remember bringing a backpack of beer because I didn't really know what the meetings was about. When I came there in the morning, I realized, shit, there's no one drinking. So I was a bit shy. I put the backpack of beer under the desk, And
where was that meeting? What city
in
were you
Singapore.
In
Singapore. So I had
Right.
been drinking before. I was up there
Right.
6:30 before, drinking by myself outside, and then walking into the meeting. And after I walked out, and I thought this is completely the wrong place for me. But after I had been to hospital and got that injection, and we came back from Thailand, so I was about 3 or 4 days without the drinking. I came into a meeting, and I kept coming back basically almost every day for the next sort of 4 or 5 years. I did at least 5 meetings a week, most likely 6 in average.
I'm curious that very first meeting that you tried to go to with the backpack of beer, how had you found out about it?
It was from my coming wife then, who reached out to a common friend of us who have had some problems before, who recommended it, and
Right.
she got phone number from some guy who sent me some SMS, and recommended,
Right.
come to this meeting, come here and there, and I made a promise to come there, and I showed up one day, but yeah, not sober at all. I don't really remember much of that one.
And had you heard about AA meetings sort of growing up or in your life through all of this craziness?
No, I hadn't. Not necessarily. I
That's
just
interesting.
I had a very small awareness from perhaps some movie or something, but I didn't
Right.
know. I mean, it is anonymous, so it's extremely hard to find out, I guess.
Right. And I suppose I live in Los Angeles, where there's an AA meeting on every corner that we and every 5 minutes. But I suppose in Southeast Asia, it's a lot less common,
It is, and there's also much more stigma there.
Right.
The locals, the Asians, don't really come to meetings. Not common at all. It's the expats, if anything, and yeah, it's very rare that people go to meetings.
I'm curious what you found there that helped or worked or kept you to come back.
Well, first it was that gift of desperation. I understood that this was a close call. I understood I was close to dying. I was so sick and I should say also that my left foot at this time was swollen like an elephant foot, and I done X-rays and I done MRI scans. They checked if it was gout and so on. And it wasn't. It was from over drinking alcohol, but also a psychosomatic illness from all the anxiety and so on I had.
Wow, that's amazing.
And so based on that, I understood this is, my last chance here. So the fear of dying kept me coming back, and I was lucky because there was a lot of people who shared stories right away who were inspirational. I saw successful business people who made me feel welcome, made me feel comfortable. There was no stigma there, and I just gave it my best shot. I did not go halfway in. I went all in terms of being the first one there, meeting people before, being to the meeting the people after, and really went all in.
And how long have you been sober now?
6 years and 2 months.
Right. Nice. And what's your life like now? I mean, what are you doing for work? Are you still in the advertising world? Are you still doing that kind of work?
I have moved on to more the job I had when I sobered up. I still have today. What I've changed
Right.
was that the pandemic moved me from being an employee to being a business owner. So I own the franchise, and as it happened, it's a business that plays me straight in my hands with being in recovery, because we do confidential peer groups. The network, which is similar in the US and also which is our mother company, is Vistage. So I do that in Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia. So we create confidential peer group meetings for senior executives and entrepreneurs where they can discuss the work-related challenges. So while before I was in recovery, I was selling memberships for that, I now basically am the business owner, and I can lead by example. And everyone who's a member, we have 1,000 members now, they know my story as well.
How cool. And so I'm just sort of curious about this business. What is it, a subscription business? Like you pay a monthly, and how much does it cost?
So the most pay for a yearly fee, and it's about 3,000 US a year. And then
Wow.
it's really like you have your private advisory board. So we have facilitators who run these groups. We have 29 groups now, and so it's like a cohort where you have in-person meetings, tools between sessions, and it's really to make sure that you're not feeling isolated, you're not feeling stressed about your work, you have someone to reach out to. So it's actually absolutely perfect for me, than being in recovery and leading by example and telling people what can happen if we're not open and honest about our challenges. Because if
And
I addressed my challenges heads on earlier, it might not have gone so badly.
it's interesting. I mean, I guess on a day, so I'm curious, like on a day-to-day basis, what I mean, like are you spending more of your time sort of doing business development, or more of your time doing kind of what it sounds to me is kind of like executive coaching and that kind of thing?
So I was in the going back a few years ago now. I was very hands-on, conducting the meetings, facilitating, and so on. These days, I'm more the CEO, more strategy, business development. I built up a full team, 22 full-time staff who's running it, and about 20 freelancers who are the moderators. So I'm more focused on growing the business and so on, and I'm now more focused myself also on my speaking career and coaching career. So I work 60% for these peer group meetings and the business, and 40% on my other business.
And then where
coaching
do
and
you
speaking.
spend most of your time?
So I step by step, I'm spending more and more time now speaking, and I have been traveling all over Southeast Asia and now Europe also here at the moment to speak. I've been speaking at all the major conferences, and I've been to Maldives twice, and I'm heading back to the Maldives again in October. I went Sri Lanka, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia. So I'm truly blessed. So you ask how my life is? Well, it's truly what we say. It's about a life beyond my wildest dreams. Yeah.
Where do you live? Like, where do you actually reside?
That's a very tricky question, Nick. Today I will sleep in Sweden,
Right.
but Singapore was my home during my early recovery, and it was very nice. I call it almost like my steady rehab. Singapore is clean, safe, and so on.
Right.
But after 5 years sober, it was time to get out in the world again. And my back office, I say, is in Thailand, Phuket. That's where I keep my studio and my bicycles, and that's my home. But
Right.
I'm constantly on the go.
And have you reconciled with your son?
Yes, so he is in Sweden. He's 15 now. He lives with my ex-wife here. I saw him yesterday. We went out for a bike ride. I will see him for cinema tomorrow night. So I made the steps properly. I have made my amends to my ex-wife and to my son. and we have very open communication about what happened, and I do everything I can to make up for it.
That's great. That's cool. I have a 15-year-old son as well. I really value my friendship with him. Though I sometimes hate being his father. But I I it's interesting, like listening to your story. One thing that struck me, and I don't know if this is something that you've thought about, but that like it seems, and this has not been my experience, so it's why I think it maybe seems distinct to me. Your identity was very much caught up in your job, like you mentioned in your story that twice you sort of got to a point of like it sounded like spiritual identity crisis over the loss of a job, and I wonder is that if you feel that's an accurate description, and if it is something that you have developed a different relationship with your place in the work world versus your place in the world at large, and if that has any relevance to what you do professionally.
Yes, so that was my issue. I had put my all eggs in one basket, and I don't want to say it as an excuse, but being an expat, the job you hold, they are responsible for everything from your work permit, from your visa, from putting your child in school. They look after the house, you have a car and a driver, and everything is there by the company. So if they pull the plug on your job, you literally have 30 days to leave the country. And when it's happening overnight, you have plans, you have your whole life there, then it is really, really an issue. Especially if you're busy in a job, you might not even have an updated CV. And that is the big chaos that happens when you're on the road as an expat. And I've seen it happen to so many. That's why these days I have learned my lesson, Nick. And that's why when I said I'm working 60% for the peer group company now, this is something that everyone I'm working with, including my co-partner and owner, knows, and that I'm working 20% then on my coaching business, 20% on my speaking business, is so I have a portfolio. So if my peer group company, which is a franchise model, is sold or I lose that, I have the two other income streams. And I also therefore have my own company set up now. So I work as a consultant. I have a consultant company. So my residency, my permits is something that I have as mine, and it's very different. And I invoice then the companies I'm working for. So that in that sense, I don't want to work for a company as an expat again, because it hurt me, but I've seen it hurt so many others.
Yeah, I mean, I think that all sounds like logistically sound, but I don't know. I mean, and valid. I think like what I see sometimes happening to people I know is they lose their job, and it's happened to me. I mean, I work in Hollywood where you're constantly being judged by your success, and like I'm not very successful, and like it's been it's been, I feel like, part of my journey to like recognize that my value in this world isn't just monetary, like that like I provide. I mean, I think it's one of the great gifts of the 12-step programs is that they immediately give you a role. Like, you're the greeter. You're here. Like, you actually, I know you feel like a piece of shit because you've lost everything because you're an addict, but actually you have value. Like, here's something you can do. And like, whatever, I volunteer at organizations and I volunteer at my kids' schools, and like I'm a pretty involved parent. And, I know on some fundamental level that I am a gifted writer and I am a very funny stand-up, and there's a lot of things I do incredibly well that I just haven't. I mean, I feel like I haven't gotten the monetary recognition for it, but like I feel like part of my part of like what I've come to through recovery is this recognition that like my net worth and my self-worth are not the same thing. And I wonder if that comes up in your coaching with these, like, presumably successful executives, since they're paying $3,000 a year to be a part of it, which isn't a crazy amount of money, but that's a significant commitment, and I'm just curious about that, like, if that's an issue for your clients, that like, they lose a job and they lose their whole sense of, like, who am I, even if they have, some of these people, they lose their jobs at a point where whatever, they've got all the money in the world, it doesn't really matter. And still they go crazy.
Yeah, it's a big blow to the ego. It was that to me. And as I shared, the first time I lost a job, I didn't know what to say to family and friends. And I was telling all kind of lies and making it sound like it was, my own choice of going after something else. And the second time I was just stunned. I just could not imagine and believe it. Yeah. And it was really, 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 really hard for me. But it's the same for many others I do. I'm coaching others. And I can mention one guy, not by name, but someone who, since about 4 years now, since he was let go, he's still not over it.
Right.
And he's still working on, this. And he's not one of the people in the 12-step program, but because I'm coaching him, I'm helping him to guide him through to making amends and getting over it. And he's just now 4 years later going back to some of the people that he mistreated, and he started to see it from a different perspective. And with that, surprise, he's starting to feel better. He started to have some acceptance and ready to move forward.
I mean, it's funny that there is that thing where, like, as alcoholics or addicts, you end up in this program maybe, and it gives you all these tools that, like, sometimes when I have, like, friends and colleagues and family members who don't have addiction issues, but they have fucked up life issues, I'm like, God, I wish they had a 12-step program. They could learn some things and, like, have some support too. Like, I mean, I feel like, just as you said, going into your first, 12-step meeting and just hearing people be non-judgmental and sharing their own experience. I mean, there's comfort in that, and there's hope in that, and there's strength in that. Anyway, I don't need to belabor this point. It's just interesting to think about. I'm curious, you've written a book, right?
Yes, exactly about what we just is talking about now, Nick. Because
and what's it called?
Executive Loneliness.
Oh, interesting. Wow, how interesting. I didn't realize that. I should have read the emails.
No worries. So what happened, Nick, was that, about 1 year into my recovery, I was feeling already great. I was so grateful for everything I had and so on. And then I lost a friend of mine in Singapore, a HR professional, someone from England who was there. And I lost this friend to suicide, and I was shocked. And I remember calling up his brother immediately after this. I got this sad news and asking what I could do. And, I asked, can he help to close his LinkedIn? What about his Facebook? Should I help to arrange with the funeral? Anything else? And he said, no, Nick, you have a good network. Shout out this message loud to make sure that people, understand that we should talk about what is on our mind. If we are isolated, if we are lonely, we need to talk about it. He said, shout that out message loud. Simon would have loved you to do that. So that's what he told me. And, so I went from being scared, angry and everything to suddenly I had this mission. I promised his brother that I will do that. I was thinking, what should I do? And I picked up my mobile phone and I made a video where I shared what had happened. And I said I will set up a charity fund now. And I went into a website and set up one of those funds as to raise money and awareness for the end of executive loneliness is what I called it. And I posted it on LinkedIn, went out for a run. When I came back, this had gone viral all around the world. Hundreds of people were writing. It was so many shares.
Right.
And money was pouring in. And then radio stations, newspapers, magazines, journalists from all around the world wanted to interview me. And by this stage, my recovery world was the recovery meetings and a few close friends who knew what was going on. Suddenly, I was on live TV, live radio, being fully interviewed about my recovery. And I was in a shock. So I answered them as openly as I have with you today. So within a few hours, my whole life story goes live before even friends and so on know it. It's just all
Right.
over the news.
Wow, that's wild. And now you've turned that into a book?
Yeah, because there was so much media exposure, it was so much coming in, and immediately with all this media exposure, and I just one of them was, for example, a 4 pages feature in the Business Times, which is the biggest business newspaper in Singapore, and they said this is the biggest mental health addiction or a piece written in the country's history in a big business press, and with that, then all the chambers of commerce and all the business organization wanted me to come and give a keynote and talk about this at the conferences and so on, which I started to do. And that's when everyone said, you need to write a book about this. And I will come to then why I agreed to write a book, because every single time I gave my talk, the first question they came up with after was, Nick, you were clearly having an alcohol problem, which means that you got this wonderful community you're talking about where you managed to recover. I'm not an alcoholic, so I cannot get the same help as you. What should I do? And with that, I thought I better write a book for what is it about the 12-step programs for someone who's not an addict or alcoholic. So I picked out the good steps from the recovery program and written for someone who don't have that addiction issue.
And the program that you outlined in Executive Loneliness is to combat what exactly?
Well,
executive loneliness, or is it just sort of midlife malaise, or?
It is for anyone who might, have some issues in their life. The first step so it's 5 steps in my book. The first step is the one taking stock, which we do in the recovery program. And then in the second step is about asking for help. And the third one I have is about getting healthy. The fourth one is about relationships to make amends. And then the fifth one, finding your purpose and giving back. So that's the 12th step, obviously, in the 12-step program otherwise. So those were the key steps that I really thought was there for someone also without a drinking issue.
Well, cool. Well, Nick, it's great to talk to you. I really, I enjoyed it very much. It's a great story, and it sounds like the book is really interesting. I'll have to pick it up and give it a read.
Yeah, I'd love to send you a copy, Nick. And if any of the listeners want to pick up one, it's on Amazon and it's called Executive Loneliness.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming in. It's great to talk to you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. You can support this podcast at patreon.com/thedrunkalogs.